Awesome. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today in this final of the three-part series, taking deeper dive, look into the workings of Del Maguey, stories, history, all that kind of stuff. Super excited to have Gabe back with us today. Gabe is, actually, first of all, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function if you're on your computer at the bottom of the screen, so I don't lose anything in the chat if there are comments coming in. And I'll interrupt Gabe when it's appropriate to ask the questions. Gabe will be doing the heavy lifting today. Gabe Bonfanti is the Director of Sustainability for Del Maguey. And I always love listening to him talk because I learn more and more what it means to be a sustainable brand every time I listen to him. His projects are amazing and they cover a lot of different fields, which is really cool to learn about. So without any further ado, Gabe Bonfanti.
Thank you, Misty. Hello, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. We really appreciate it, and we know there's a lot of different and important presentations that are happening all the time. So thanks for being here with us today. We're gonna just give sort of a bit of a recap on some of the sustainability projects that we have down here in Oaxaca and in Puebla, Mexico. So it'll be broad up based on things that we have done, in some aspects, things that we are doing and where we're trying to get to. And so in a lot of cases, it'll be basic information. And if you have additional questions, we'll be happy to answer those to the best of our knowledge. So let me just share the screen real quick. And get started. Okay. So Del Maguey, even if you've joined us for the past couple of presentations, past couple of weeks, it's important to always note that it was founded in 1995 by Ron Cooper, and this year we're celebrating our 25th anniversary, which is pretty phenomenal, and it's special, even though this year has been so tumultuous and flipped everything on its end. It's still the 25th anniversary of Del Maguey, which is pretty amazing. So that alone is a really nice launch point to talk about sustainability, because we have we like to put the sustainability bubble into three pillars, which are economic, environmental, and social sustainability. The economic sustainability can deal with two key aspects. One is the survival of the business over time, and then the second, which is equally important within that scope, is the economic sustainability and security for the producing families that we work with. So I think that's a really nice and important place to start. Whenever we're talking about new projects, whenever we're talking about different expressions, there's always, like Misty likes to say, there's always a family behind that bottle, and it's a really important aspect, and it's an integral part to the ethos of Maguey, that we're supporting these small farmer producers and curating their liquid art and giving their art a platform around the world behind the Del Maguey brand and label, which is really important, and it gives them exposure that they wouldn't have had otherwise on their own. And that was the business model that Ron started in 1995. He refused to mix spirits from different pueblos together, and the larger public wouldn't know about it. So it's really that craft focus on individual families and the single village that makes Del Maguey so special. And and as a result, it's created economic sustainability and growth opportunities for the families over the course, for some families over the course of 25 years, and for some of the newer families between 24 and 10 or 15 years. So it's you know, it's the reason why we're all here, and we just always want to celebrate the producers and the families, and for that reason we start off discussing them. Faustino Garcia Vasquez, the first producer to work with Ron, and his son Maximino Garcia, and so, and another aspect of sustainability and within the same scope here is when Ron would always ask, how did the mezcal stay the same and really stay local with the flavor, they would just say father to son, father to daughter, passing the information on, the generational knowledge. And in the globalized world that we live in, it's a really wonderful thing to have stories like Maximino coming back home from working in the fields in California because there were opportunities back home, and he could help out his father and continue the generational knowledge of being a palanquero and mezcalero. So that's also sustainability, keeping the knowledge in the family, keeping the knowledge in the place, so that the terroir, the wild yeasts, the water, none of that profile changes. And that's a really important aspect. And then what we do as support to that is anything we can do to support that doesn't actually diminish any aspect of the traditional artisanal methods of making mezcal. So just highlighting the family and the relationships with the family, because that's a really important part of the tradition and where we're going in the future. There's Ron Cooper with the family in Chichicapa, and there we are at one of the birthday parties. And it's like that with all the families. I'm not going to show pictures of every producing family, but you know, we always want to emphasize how important that is to us. So Luis Carlos Vasquez in Santa Catarina Minas, ancestral mezcal. His wife Alejandrina. You know, the duties are shared between everyone in the household, and the women work just as hard as the men, as well with the production. I mean, we see it every day when we go out to the pueblos. Same thing in Chichicapa, the women are tending to the fires, helping with the milling. It's all hands on deck, and it's a really wonderful part of the culture. Luis Carlos emptying out the still from the first distillation. And there's his son, who's now working in the Palenque, and his grandson, Joaquin. So Luis Carlos Jr. and Joaquin. So Luis Carlos is extremely proud of the fact that there's now 4 generations. Well, we're looking forward to the 4th generation of mezcalero within just producing for Del Maguey, with Del Maguey, because his father was the first producer to work with Ron from Santa Catarina Minas. So, you know, father to son, father to daughter, such an important part of our mission. And here's the family in San Luis del Rio, Paciano Cruz Nolasco, and his son Marcos Cruz is also a big time producer. So the two of them are responsible for Vida and Vida all around the world, which is pretty phenomenal. So, and there's Marcos with his son Alexander and European ambassador Roman. And Misty in Santo Domingo Alvarez with Esperidion Morales, Luis. And Esperidion's daughter, Esther. And Ron hanging out with the 3 generations. So I just get a kick out of this and showing the relationships that we have with the families, how much respect we have for them, and that, you know, Ron and Steve Olson always like to stress, and it's really important that over the course of 25 years, we've never lost a business relationship with these producers. And what does that mean in a part of the world where written contracts really didn't start to materialize in these pueblos until maybe the last couple of years? It was always a verbal contract. You stick to your word and you keep your word, and that's how these relationships develop and grow. And they always kept their word to Ron, and Ron always kept his word to them. And and that's why we have these relationships today, and why Ron is godfather to kids in each of these families. It's a really close and special relationship. Rogelio Martinez Cruz and Santa Maria Alvaradas, and then a group of producers in San Pablo, Amayaltepec, Puebla. So from an economic sustainability perspective, it's really important to note that. And then we'll switch gears and get into the environmental sustainability. And in that transition, there's a little bit of the economic part. When you're dealing with cultivated agave in this region, and really in any region, you have these long growth cycles of 5 to 7, 8, 9 years, depending on the type of terrain that the plants are planted in. And so your modeling has to reflect, what type of demand there might be in the future, what spot market prices are for agave, and determining all of that within your business model, so that you know when the best time to invest is. Right now, we're currently experiencing an economic crisis, probably in Mexico and in the whole world, and it's a testament to some companies' business models, how they're dealing with their raw material resources. So that's just one more point on the economic side. But from an environmental perspective, the cultivated agaves, like this one that we're looking at here, which is the Tequiliana Weber, grown in Soledad Salinas, Oaxaca, or agave espadín, and this picture is taken in Teotitlán del Valle, where our bottling facility is. They typically mature at a faster rate than a lot of other agaves, and between 5 and 7 years with a high sugar content, and they also reproduce in a number of different ways. So these are points that we touched on, that Misty touched on in the first presentation a couple of weeks ago, but it's always important just to stress it again, that an agave espadín, for example, can reproduce in a number of different ways. It can reproduce asexually with with offshoots or rhizomes that grow up from the base of the mother plant, and it can also produce those similar type of clones with the same genetic makeup from little hijuelitos, little pups that grow out of the flowers on the flowering stalk that we're looking at there, if those flowers were not already pollinated by pollinators and turned into a sexual reproduction. And then there's one other type of production, and that's human intervention and cloning, but we don't really focus on that too much because we don't see that very often. But those are the 4 types of reproduction that we can experience and that we see in agave espadín, and the same with the Tequiliana Weber. And so one of the challenges that we come up against in this case, here's a nice field of agave espadín in San Luis del Rio, and then the sort of the milpa system, where you can be planting corn and beans and squash among the agave, which you'll see in lots of villages, and it's a nice way for people to take advantage of the soil and keep the soil replenished in the first phase of an agave growth cycle, because once the agave grows, the pincas grow out too much, then it's really hard to get into the rows and plant other other vegetables and corn and stuff like that. But it's a nice way to keep the crop cycle fresh and replenished with nitrogen, and to have other food sources in the same terrain. And there's Passiano with some big ones. So you can see how big the agave gets. And Ron Cooper with the classic finger pointing to the sky. The agave receives its cosmic energy and gives that back to us when we produce it. So here's an example of these rhizomes and these hijuelos, and really the producers in general. And this is where you get to a nice balance between genetic diversity and monoculture. The espadines that are pollinated from seed tend to grow a little bit slower, actually, and have less sugar content initially than these rhizomes and offshoots. So for a lot of producers, they like to use these hijuelos. Now the proper balance there is to make sure that these hijuelos are coming from different regions, because there's not a monoculture in Oaxaca like there had been in Jalisco. But one of the reasons that happened was because these offshoots grow. There's lots of them. There's up to 13 or 15 over the course of a plant's life cycle, and there's three different stages of hijuelos. So after the first 2 years of a plant's growth, it'll have some very strong hijuelos that come off underneath, and this is the first wave. And then the second round of hijuelos will come between when the plant is 3 and 4 years old, and these ones are still strong, but they're a little bit weaker and a little bit more susceptible to plague and smaller. And then there's a third round of hijuelos that would come off in the later stages of the plant's life, and these are the hijuelos that are probably, you have to look out for them. They're not going to be as big, and they'll probably be a little bit more prone to diseases. So there's a few different levels of hijuelos, as well as making sure that people are sourcing their agave hijuelos from espadín that has a slightly different genetic makeup around Oaxaca. And that's a wonderful thing, because Oaxaca's so diverse. Not all the espadín have the same genetic makeup. And so for now, we're not dealing with a monoculture, but it's something that we always have to keep monitoring. So just an example of these hijuelos, and these are probably 2 years old and ready to be planted into their own field now. And then within a year, they'll have their own offshoots coming off. So it's a really wonderful method of reproduction, and that, along with the hijuelitos that you can get off of flowers, means that each plant is capable of producing thousands of offspring. Now that's a stark contrast between the wild agave. This is an example of one last picture of the Del Maguey's bulbil replanting program, which are the hijuelos, the asexual plants that come off of the flowering stalk, the quiote, and our agronomist Cesarez Santiago and our Director General Arturo Ramirez Centeno have started this program, and it's going really well, and you can generate thousands of plants a year from the quiotes of the espadín. So it's a really nice, this is also a really important aspect of environmental sustainability in agave for your cultivated crops. And then we start to get into a discussion about the wild agave, and the wild agave have a much lesser rate of reproduction. And so for that reason, I think that it's garnered a lot of attention in the last 5, 6, 7 years, how people are managing their wild agave ecosystems, and whether human intervention is necessary or a good thing, or a variety of factors surrounding those ideas. So in general, the wild agaves can also reproduce in more than one way, but not always. So it's really, it's a plant, it's contextual per plant, how it reproduces and what the success rate of the pollination of its seeds are in the wild. On average, what we're looking at right now is a wild agave named agave jabali, Aconvalis, and this is an example of its flowering stock. It has a different flowering stock than what we saw with the espadín and what others would have with with more of a straight up stalk, and its flowers coming off of just that stalk right there. And in general, you can probably get thousands of seeds, let's say a kilogram, at least 5,000 to 10,000 seeds per plant. And if you're replanting that yourself, then the success rate is going to be a little bit better for germination. But in the wild, what the producers tend to tell us is that, and the agronomists, is that for every, let's say, 5,000 seeds in a wild agave stock, about maybe five to 10 of those will grow to full maturity. So that's nature's success rate, and it's served agave really well over millions of years. But now that we're at the height of a mezcal boom, people have been really, interested in the sustainability of harvesting wild agave crops. So for Del Maguey, we've always had the philosophy that, the main expression across the line is espadín, and the vast majority of the liquid produced for Del Maguey is espadín, over 85% probably. And then with 9 or 10 other agaves, they would make up the additional 15% of Del Maguey's production in 1 year, which, then you break that down per expression, it's a lot less, and it's coming from different communities. And so with that being said, the communities are in charge of managing their natural resource. And so you start to see how certain municipalities have handled over harvesting, or buyers coming in from different states like Jalisco, or even with the increased demand for mezcal, how these municipalities have handled requests for people to harvest wild agave. In the communities that we work in, the municipalities never let outside people come in and buy, just buy the raw material to process somewhere else. They have local policies that only local producers can go out and cut wild agave. They have a quota per year that they communicate to us, that they communicate with their local municipality, and they are always leaving quiotes to flower in the wild. And so that's been reassuring for us for so long, to have this relationship where Del Maguey doesn't demand anything. They give us a quota per year, and then that's what's purchased, and that's that. And that's one reason why wild agave expressions are priced higher, because you can't plan and model how much wild agave you're going to get over X amount of years. That's determined by the local municipalities, and I think it's always really important to stress that. Nonetheless, here's an example of a tepestate. So really shockingly bright yellow flowers that bloom in early March, late February to late March, and that could change slightly depending on the climate and stuff. But really shockingly wonderful and beautiful plants and flowers that only flower once in their life. And so with a lot of our producers, they have their own nurseries and their own plantations. So with like an Aroqueño, for example, this is a field owned by Pastiano Cruz Nolasco, and it has its own offshoots, and it was classically a cultivated agave, and so this is one example of an agave that can easily be cultivated, and we're doing it, and different producers have their own agave management programs in their villages, and we celebrate that, as well as in the Mixteca region of Oaxaca. The producer has his own management of papilome. It's wild. It's always wild, but he makes sure that they're not over harvesting, and that the natural resources is always in abundance. So I think it's always important to stress that. And just pictures of a tobala before being roasted. They're very small. And these ones, the tobala, don't actually reproduce with rhizomes or offshoots. They typically only reproduce through the flowering and pollination. And so it's important that the producers and the producing villages let the flowering stalks flower, so that the wild tobala populations can continue to thrive in those areas where they do thrive. And what we're doing to help in any way that we can at this point is we also have a small wild agave and tree sapling nursery in Teotitlán del Valle, and this has been a work in progress, but the nursery is built and seeds are planted, and agave, there are tobala and tepestate growing now, and now with the rainy season they're growing a little bit faster. So this is an example of what the agave seeds look like, and in this case we have a few thousand tobala, tepestate, and huish seeds. A percentage of them went to the nursery in Teotitlán. Here's the nursery now, and when this is basically called a semillero. So this is like a seed nursery to start. Once those plants get big enough for their containers, then they'll be replanted and they'll grow for another year in the ground adjacent, and that's considered the nursery. And then from the nursery, we'll offer it to the local municipalities to have replanting programs in the wild. So this isn't meant to be cultivated in any way. This is just this is sort of a environmental / social project to get people involved in replanting wild agave, and there will be a loss rate when we plant those in those communities, but it's going to be a really nice project to look back on once we have a rotation of saplings coming out year after year. So next year will be the first year that we replant in the wild with the wild agave. And there's Jose, who's a naturalist, self-proclaimed naturalist, and this is his land, and he's in charge of the nursery there in Teotitlán del Valle. And here's an example of the trees that we're growing there as well. And because the scope, and there's some tobala coming up. So it takes a long time to grow these things, but once they do start coming up, they actually grow a little bit fast. And so we'll probably switch gears here for a second and talk about another aspect of sustainability, which is directly tied to that, which is the reforestation. So in certain communities, like San Luis del Rio, for example, space is limited, everything's vertical, and it's really wonderful to drive in and see the agave sort of planted on these high hills. And it looks like wine country in some parts of the world where they almost plant these huge agave on a vertical landscape. And typically, mezcal producing communities are not forestry communities. So that's a link that's made between mezcal producing regions and the forestry regions, the tree that produce the lumber. So in this case, we're looking at cleared land to plant espadín, and that obviously doesn't look very good, and it does have there's deforestation involved there. But that's land that's given to community members for social service that they've done. There's not a lot that we can do as a company to address that, except to stress that there's erosion there, and perhaps that there's better methods of planting. But we've talked about that with the producers, and it's a work in progress to see if there's ways to reduce erosion in those hills, but at the same time, finding ways to have reforestation projects, because wood is a critical part of, burning wood is a critical part of the flavors that you get in mezcal. Here's a picture of the roast in Santa Maria Alboradas. Misty and I were with a team of videographers filming a shoot around in our producing villages, and this was a really wonderful morning. And it just gives you a sense of the amount of wood that's burned in mezcal production. You know, when you take a step back and compare it to other regions, other industries, mining, lumber in general, furniture and stuff like that, you know, like, and then the wood that people burn at home, it's all part of the same issue. You know, mezcal is not taking up more wood necessarily than any of those other industries, because they bring wood down from these high Sierra villages and communities all the time. And I don't think that mezcal consumes as much, but we have to be conscious, and we have to be environmentally conscious of our consumption and what we're doing to curb that as mezcal continues to grow, and we're here and present and able to offer support in any way that we can. So just examples of wood being burned in the ancestral method, and some pine trees between Santa Maria Alboradas and Santo Domingo Alboradas. Lots of pine. You know, the main that's used in the roasts is pine and encino and mesquite, and there's other high burning woods that impart flavor that they use in the roast. And then the wood that's used in the distillation is a little bit less important. You know, it doesn't necessarily have the flavor, and then you can start to get into different conversations about sustainability in the distillation process. But in general, Oaxaca has lots of forests, and wood is an abundant resource. But as we've seen in many parts of the world, you know, you have to be very conscious about licensing and the impact studies that allow logging companies to get into certain communities, and that does happen. So in this case, we're looking at the nursery of a foundation of a large privately owned foundation in Oaxaca that has a goal of planting between 2 and 4 million trees a year. And so they've given us the green light to work with communities and plant as many trees as we would like each year, starting off small and getting bigger and bigger as long as there's community involvement. So this is a wonderful thing about forming partnerships in any industry, but it's a cool part of Oaxaca because there are other organizations, there are other companies who care, and this is a nice example. So this year, hopefully, we could still get some trees out and plant them, because the rainy season lasts until September, October. So once the pueblos open up, we'll definitely be taking some trees out, a couple thousand trees, and planting them. And this is an example of that nursery. And last year we did have a reforestation project in Santa Catarina, Minas, and it was a really interesting. It's always a learning experience, finding out if you can have access to public land and asking permission, and really depending on the local relationships that the producers have with their local councils and the municipality. So in this case, they did grant us access to plant around 600 to 1,000 trees, and it's a nice experience. And it was near a water source, so this survival rate of those trees is probably around half right now, which that's what happens with these reforestation projects. You spend a lot of time on the first day planting, and then you have to actually do the follow-up. And so that's the challenge that lies ahead, and in these in mezcal producing communities, and also in the lumber producing communities, to get community involvement and make sure that once we provide the trees and the replanting program, that there's follow-up and a survival rate, and it's not used as grazing land for goats and other livestock and things like that. So there's a lot of factors involved in a successful reforestation program. But the cool thing is we have people dedicated to helping us, and Elvia, who's pictured here, is a professor of forestry, and these are her students who volunteer for social service. So we have volunteers that will come from the city, and we'll also get volunteers from the local communities. And still falling under environmental sustainability, we've installed some solar panels in a couple of palenques producing facilities that didn't have access to electricity. And in this case, to power enough light for Santo Domingo to work comfortably at night, they really just needed one solar panel, which is, visually it doesn't look too impressive, but it's pretty impressive that just one solar panel produces enough light inside for that. So they've been really happy with that development, because they were working with candles and regular flashlights and headlamps for years, and then now the only thing they have to replace every once in a while is a car battery, and the solar panel will last for years. So that was fun to install. And we did the same thing in San Luis del Rio. I mean, this is just an example of how far San Luis del Rio has come. This is 2016. This is 2016, where we installed solar electricity in Paseanos Palenque for the first time. And so prior to that, for 20 years, they worked with flashlights at night. And this is an example of what the Palenque looked like when I first started working here 5 years ago, and that this was already rebuilt from a flood 5 years before that. So yeah, this is the next phase is another key aspect of what we're doing is, we've grown as a company, and so when you grow, you scale. And the only way to scale in mezcal is to scale artisanally or to scale ancestrally. Scaling ancestrally is a whole nother concept that requires a lot of manpower. But in San Luis del Rio, because of Pastiano Cruz Nolasco and his ability as a farmer and as a producer, he's able to and the amount of land that he owned at the edge of this river, he was able to actually scale artisanally, and we were able to do that right alongside with him, so that it was sort of a joint project. So that's the same palenque from right here, And here it is 3 years later on one side. And he also owns land on adjacent to it. It's all together really. And we built, Gabe invested in another palenque, essentially, another platform. And because of the risk of flooding in the valley, we had to make sure that the entire palenque was raised onto a platform 4 meters above the river, and so that it was out of harm's way of the historical river, historical peak of the river during a flood. And so this is an example. So I feel comfortable sharing this picture now. This is a picture from the past of the typical way that vinazas were managed and are currently managed in 95% of palenques near rivers in Oaxaca. You know, the producers never saw that there was value in vinazas. It was just an effluent, a byproduct of mezcal production. And the best way to get it out of your property was to put it into the river. And so a lot of people still do that. So there's two byproducts of mezcal distillation that we like to focus on. One is bagazo, and bagazo or bagasse is the spent fiber from the crushed, fermented, and distilled agave. Unlike tequila, for example, all the fibers are crushed and fermented and distilled. So in tequila, the fibers are taken out after the crushing process, and it's only liquid is fermented, only liquid is distilled. The juice, the sugars from the agave, the juice from the agave, the crushed agave. But in this case, the bagazo is distilled, and after the first distillation, it's taken out, and there's also vinaza that comes out. So this is an example of Luis Carlos in his old palenque, previous palenque, taking out the bagazo with a pitchfork. The hat, the montera from the clay pot still is to the side, and he's chucking the bagazo out the back of his palenque. And so lots of heat. There's still lots of heat inside the still from the distillation. And so they'll take all the bagazo out. The bagazo has liquid. The liquid dripping off of that is the vinaza. The vinaza is the remaining liquid that did not evaporate during the first and second distillation. Vinaza is organic matter, high in sugars, high in acidity, and it has chemical demand of oxygen, biochemical demand of oxygen. And when it's discharged hot directly from a still into a waterway, it can certainly have an adverse effect on the environment over time, or over root systems if it's just being discharged over topsoil and stuff like that. So that's been a nice challenge for us the last couple of years, is figuring out, while we're scaling artisanally, how we could also manage the waste and actually have waste remediation. And so we engaged in a couple of different projects, lots of different research. You know, it actually took up a lot of my time. Like, when we want to focus on so many different projects in sustainability, but as Vita grew, and it only grew in one place with this palenque in particular, we had to make sure that it was a sustainable enterprise built on Paciano's land. And so this is, you know, it's really critical to mention that all of the waste management aspect, anything that added costs to the traditional cost of making mezcal it results in being the responsibility of the comercializador, the commercializers, or the partners who are exporting the mezcal into the outside of Mexico, essentially. So it's an additional cost, and that's why you don't see a lot of companies involved with it. You don't see a lot of regulation with it in this river valley that we're looking at right here in San Luis del Rio. San Luis del Rio is at the bottom of two different mezcal producing communities, Santa Ana del Rio and San Juan del Rio. And if you combine all the producers in San Juan, Santa Ana, and San Luis, you're probably looking at minimum 60 producers, 60 different palenques. And how many of them are actively trying to manage their waste? Maybe, including us, maybe 5 others, like it's just not a very common practice. And so what that does is it does end up polluting the river. And it's bad in general for the ecosystem, but there's not a lot of regulation in Oaxaca with regard to environmental stewardship. So that's why I'm proud to work for Del Maguey, and that Del Maguey has invested so much time and energy into trying to solve this specifically in San Luis del Rio. Now there's different solutions for in different places, but because of the geographical location of San Luis, it just turns out that we found a method that worked for us. And so what we started to do was we heard about the adobe that had been made in Santa Catarina Minas for generations by Lalo Angeles and Graciela Angeles. Their family had done it, and they continued to do it. They built their palenques with this type of adobe. They even built a children's library in Minas with this library, and in general, it's pretty simple combination. You take the bagazo, the spent fibers from the mezcal production. You take earth, and then you add in vinaza, and then you just blend that mixture together, and then you can form adobe bricks or larger adobe structures, molds with that combination. So there was an engineer who's an engineer / architect who helped Graciela, or who participated or volunteered with the project in Minas, and then he started to conduct studies on the resilience of those adobes when you compared them to other types of building materials. Regular adobe used with animal excrement or or even concrete. And what these tests that they did in the laboratory revealed was that this adobe was stronger than any of that, and it would last through earthquakes, and it would last for 100 years longer than even a concrete cement structure, as long as it was built properly. So it's a really high tensile strength, and it doesn't break, and it adapts during an earthquake, and it won't crack. So it's a really wonderful building material. So we started. So this guy Alejandro, he worked with Sombra Mezcal has done a really nice job with their brick program, and they've built homes in areas affected by flooding and earthquakes. And we just weren't going to be able to have a brick making program in San Luis del Rio. It didn't seem feasible. So Ron Cooper said, "God don't make new land anymore." And so just with that brilliant insight, we got to work, and we worked with Alejandro and his company COA to first build a structure here in front of the platform. This is the platform at 4.5 meters high, with these gaviones, which are these chain link boxes, cages with rocks in them that are built for flooding purposes. And here we're going to build a structure in front of that. And so that's what we did. They got prefabricated concrete walls, these concrete zapatas, these feet, and then we started to mix the bagasso and vinasa and earth together. And in that first run, we were able to put 150 to 200,000 liters of vinasa, like 40 or 50 tons of bagasso, and this equivalent 40 or 50 tons of earth into this structure. And so that it came out really well, and there it is. But because of the costs involved with the prefabricated concrete walls, you know, we realized that we could just build out a patio without having to contain the adobe. So sort of a two-part system here. We had to figure out how to manage the vinasa coming off the stills so that it wasn't filled with fibers and the bagasso fiber, which is, you know, it comes off really hot. It's really hard to manage. There's lots of reasons why producers just let it run free for a long time, because it's actually hard to contain and to do it right. But through a lot of trial and error, and this is before the palenque was electrified. We had a gravity-fed filtration system for the vinasa, and we started to develop our new land project by creating new land in the riverbed where the river would traditionally flood. And over the past 2 years since we started the project, it has not flooded, and now it keeps growing higher and higher, and so it's acting as a causeway as well to rising waters, which is really wonderful. So here's some examples of the project before it really took place. You can see the dirt getting staged, and now we're at the bottom of the patio, but you can look up and see how high the platform is still and how much space we have to grow. I mean, we have years worth of vinasa production and bagasso production to build in this what Pasiano and Ron and Steve like to call La Playa. So we're building on top of La Playa. And this is the first wave of the patio. So it started growing bit by bit, and it's really important to note that Alejandro was really instrumental here, and we were helping him at the same time. He was concluding his master's studies with I think with UNAM in Mexico City, and with the Technical University in Zurich. And so we paid for him to go to Zurich and test our vinasa and bagasso in the laboratory in this sustainable program at the University of Zurich. And the results that he was getting were the same results that we were seeing at the same time live in an industrial setting. So it was actually really cool to have this blending of academia and industry, and to actually be coming up with the same results at the same time in our large real life setting and his laboratory setting. So the results were that the mixture is actually, it's 1 part vinasa, 1 part bagasso, 1 part earth, but then you also mix in lime, and which is calidra in Spanish, and that really hardens the material, and it allows for no filtration. So we had a couple different defenses to make sure that the vinasa that we're using is not filtering down into the topsoil and doesn't get into the water. And so that's what happened. We put plastic down as one line of defense, construction plastic, and then the mixture. And now this is a picture that Greg Buda took with Steve about, I guess, 1.5 years ago. and you can see how big the palenque in general is. This is artisanal scaling in San Luis del Rio on Paciano's side. Artisanal scaling with his son Marcos is a little bit more compact and just as effective, which is pretty impressive. So you work with the space that you have, and so as you can see with the patio, we have a lot of space to grow, and it's really wonderful because eventually, you know, we're hoping that a lot of other people are interested, and there are other companies and investigators who are studying vinasse management. And just quickly, we electrified the palenque eventually as part of this program where, you know, this road was built. Previously, you could only get into the palenque by driving through the river from the village. So the road was built, the transformer was installed, and all of a sudden we had some form of electricity in San Luis del Rio that could power motors, you know, which was a nice development. Always in support of artisanal mezcal production, and that's it, you know, never changing the profile, but anything we can do to support. So in this case, the support comes from the vinasse management, the waste remediation, finding out the right way to put filters in so that the fibers don't end up in the final sort of register for the vinasses. And with the electricity, our engineer was able to install these pumps that now pump the vinasses above ground to where they are now, and this is also a work in progress, and that doesn't look pretty, but those tanks aren't sitting in water anymore. They're above ground. They're out of risk of the water, and then from there, without fibers in them, they can be redistributed to the patio, and it's a really pretty wonderful system that we have going on right now. And I think it's really important to note that we've done an environmental impact study in San Luis del Rio and tested the soil, the topsoil, the well water, and the water upriver and the water downriver, and the water downriver is less contaminated than the water above river. And this is coming from one of the larger artisanal mezcal facilities in Oaxaca and therefore the world. So we're really proud of that, and it's really cool part of the project. There's still space to grow and new systems to implement as the patio continues to grow. We'll eventually have to probably come up with a different type of treatment system. So what are other people doing in terms of treatment, and what did we look at? Well, we looked at a number of things. You know, there's these there's wastewater treatment plants that have anaerobic and aerobic digesters, and that's used a lot with human waste and human wastewater treatment plants. But you know, they're really expensive, and they don't actually work to 100% for the price that they entail. So it didn't make economic sense for us. It really doesn't make economic sense for any mezcal company, and I don't think any spirit company at this point. But then these biodigesters, which are just anaerobic digesters, so they're oxygen-free tanks. There's been some success with those, and they produce solid composting material, and then the liquid is liquid that can be supposedly discharged into a river. We're waiting for other companies to build theirs to see if that actually works, because we don't want to dump water into a river without knowing that it works. But a nice complement to biodigestion is that you can generate biogas. So you just need organic material to produce biogas. So the bagasso and the vinassa is a good first step, but it usually has to be mixed with other organic materials. It could be the pincas from chopped agave, cut agave. It could also be excrement from livestock and stuff like that. So it's really a context. All of these cases are context dependent. You know, what's going on in San Luis del Rio? What's going on in Santa Maria Alboradas? Is it possible to install this type of system there based on the organic materials that are produced in that type of village, right? So there's still a few different feasibility studies that we need, but the nice thing is with regard to the vinasse management and waste remediation in San Luis del Rio, where we have the largest amount of production, it's under control for now, which is pretty awesome. So I think that's a nice wrap up of some of the environmental sustainability stuff. And how are we doing on time, Misty?
We're doing all right. We're probably going to run a little bit over. If anybody needs to, we are running over actually, but if anybody needs to jump off, I will be putting the recording on our YouTube channel. So you just need to search for Del Maguey and Single Village Mezcal, and you'll be able to find it. So if you have to hop off and you want to see the rest of the conversation, you can watch the recording there. Gabe, I just, before we like move away from San Luis del Rio, you kept talking about our scaling artisanally. Will you just kind of describe what that is for everybody?
Oh yeah, sorry. So in general, with mezcal production, you're going to have an underground conical oven that has a capacity between 5 tons and, as it turns out, about 20 tons. Right? If you try and build an Orno with a capacity that's bigger than that, it's not going to be able to cook the agave consistently through, and you don't get the same results. So that's step one. So you can't just build a great big Orno and chuck all the agave in there. It has to be within the same parameters as a traditional sized Orno. The same thing with the fermentation. The fermentation tanks are typically between 800 liters to 1500 liters, you know, and they're made out of wood, usually oak and pine. And so you can't just build a fermentation tank that holds 4,000 liters or bring in the stainless steel fermentation tanks and expect to get the same type of flavor, because we're dealing with natural yeast and natural microbes that are in that local environment. It has to be open air. So the size of the tina just has to be replicated. And the same thing with the stills. The stills, a copper still in artisanal mezcal production ranges between 250 liters to what we use at 350 liters, right? So if you start to introduce a copper still that's over 500 liters, because it's going to be more efficient, then you're going to lose the quality of what makes a mezcal, an artisanal mezcal. So the only way to scale is to replicate that series over as many times as you have to, depending on your expected production, the expected demand in the marketplace, right? So that's why when we looked at Paciano's, at the picture of Paciano's Palenque, it's grown so much because they had to add, they went from like 3 stills. They went from 2 stills and 10 fermentation tanks and 1 roast and 1 molino with 1 horse to today. We're looking at 13 on Paciano's side, 13 stills and about 65 to 70 fermentation tanks and 3 ovens, 3 Ornos, and then the specific milling process dedicated to San Luis. So you need all that space in order to scale artisanally, and then you need more manpower and more labor, and so it's an economic opportunity for for the workers as well, because you hire more people. So Paciano is a big job creator. All right, so let's now get into some of the social projects that we've done, and this is not exhaustive. Ron and Steve, after having been here for 25 years, they just did a lot of things that I probably didn't even hear about that were beneficial in the communities. It's just always been part of the ethos to give back. But I think one of the first things I did working for the company was we helped create competition in Teutoetlan del Valle by bringing in a different internet service provider, because the monopoly Telmex was not paying attention to any of the people's needs or questions. There was shoddy service, and it didn't have a lot of range, and they wouldn't install it in new homes and stuff like that. So we worked with a new internet provider and paid for the installation of satellites or receiving dishes in 20 different homes. And that was the incentive to get the company there. And we worked with the local municipality to install this internet tower. And so once competition was on the block and people were able to get a different internet in town, then Telmex started paying attention and started to improve its service. So that was nice. And we still use the internet from this tower, actually. And then with the same company, we had the same formula in San Luis del Rio. We went out with the founder, and we climbed up a hill in San Luis del Rio, and it was on one of Paciano's workers' land, and they figured out where to get a signal from this huge tower near Veracruz, and they put up a tower in San Luis del Rio. We paid for the installation for the first 20 families, and now there's internet in San Luis del Rio. So for all of the good and all of the bad, it's there. Modernity has come, and it's been a multi-stage process where when Ron and Steve first started going, they didn't have a telephone, and then they had a caseta, which was just one telephone in the village, and then the telephones. Then people got private telephones in their homes, and then we've gone from that to the internet tower, and people can make phone calls directly online. So it's pretty cool, and it helps our communication, even though the most important part of these relationships is nose to nose, nariz a nariz, as Ron and Paciano like to say. Here's a picture of a water tanker truck that we donated to the municipality of Teutoetlan del Valle. There's local business taxes in certain communities, and they told Ron, they said, Ron, it costs 5,000 pesos a year to have a business here in the Pueblo. And Ron said, 5,000 pesos? Why don't I donate a water tanker truck, which ended up costing the company around 200,000 pesos. He's like, and talk to me in 10 years. So they're like, well, we can guarantee you for the length of the president's term of the municipality over the next couple of years, there will be no more business tax. And so we went to Puebla, and with our main transport guy, Victor Silva, picked out the truck. I drove it back and it's a dually with four tires in the back, and I drove it back from Puebla with one of the tires was flat, and I didn't even realize. But we made it, and Victor got the tank put on, and we donated it to the village, and we had a really nice lunch with everybody that works in the bottling bodega and Ron, and there was a couple of speeches, and the municipality was really thankful. It was a really nice gesture, and that's all Ron. Really cool. When the partnership with Pernod Ricard started, they had already been working with a nonprofit in Santa Ana del Rio, And so we worked with this nonprofit on a couple of projects in Santo Domingo Alboradas and Santa Maria Alboradas. My favorite was this one, where they helped bring hen-laying chickens to all these families, and now these families are still getting eggs from the chickens, and really saving money. So it's a really nice food security program that was implemented by Heifer International, in this case in Santo Domingo Alboradas, and in this case in Santa Maria Alboradas, with the, and this is Rogelio's extended family in Santa Maria Alboradas. So it's quite a big family. And in Santo Domingo, this was just one family, but they also installed these tras patios, these backyard patios to house the hens in with 10 other families. And in Santa Maria, it was with this family and I think 2 or 3 other families. So it's more of a community-wide project, which is really cool. Great concept and really difficult to execute. And in this case, with the hens, they did it. So it's really cool. What else? We're always open to having interns in the pueblos, especially with Marcos. Marcos speaks really good English, and he always wants to improve it, and he's an extremely hard worker. So we had our first intern in 2018, Griffin Marcos, and he came and he stayed for 2 months with Marcos, and this was just before the internet was installed and everything. So he really got a nice experience, and we've published some letters that he wrote to Ron about his experience on our blog, on the sustainability blog, and I'll provide a link to that at the end. So there's Griffin. He had a really nice time, and we're, people are welcome to inquire into whether or not it could be a good fit, and you could come down and volunteer and work, learn how to make mezcal with Marcos, learn some Spanish if you don't speak good Spanish, learn some Zapotec, and really get into the essence of mezcal producing culture, which it's a pretty priceless experience. It was priceless for Griffin, and it was priceless for Nick, who came last November and spent a month with Marcos, and he's a chef and a bartender, and just really, really great guy. And him and Marcos clearly got along really well. We have some other programs that are, always taking more form. We have an apiculture program. We've got some bee colonies that Jose and Elvia manage in Teotitlán del Valle, and there's some honey that will be available for visitors this year. If there's visitors, or when we have visitors, there will be some honey, and and so that's part of the hospitality program. But we're also, when the village is open, we'll install. We'll bring bee colonies and hives, the colmenas. I guess I don't know what the actual word is in English, to at least 2 villages this year, so that the producers and their families have a source of honey, and if they choose to sell it, an additional source of income over time. So that's a cool program, and we have a couple of other programs. Like I said, we didn't mention everything here, but there's a digital library that I've keep working on, that we've installed in a couple of pueblos. We've given these digitized books either in computers or tablets to 4 different communities, and we're always happy to welcome computer, phone, tablet donations, USBs that have like 60 gigabytes on them, and I can put this digital library directly onto a USB, and then we need a Windows type program to open it. But then you could download it onto whatever book you want in Spanish, onto your phone or onto your tablet. So it's a cool concept that I hope will actually lead to additional knowledge at some point for some kids or even adults in these communities and in Oaxaca as well. And we have this Zapotec revitalization program, also called a Talking Dictionary. It's a program that already existed in Oaxaca. And one of the professors, a linguist, did her PhD in the Sierra Norte part of Oaxaca, and she's committed to bringing students from Bryn Mawr College to Oaxaca and to a community that has a community leader that wants to participate in this program, and what they do is because Zapotec hasn't not traditionally been written down, these linguistic students work with community volunteers to write down words and put them up onto a platform that belongs to the community, and the platform is managed by the university system, and and then it's translated into English and Spanish, and so these talking dictionaries are a way to capture the language in different pueblos, because the Zapotec that's spoken in Teotitlan del Valle, for example, is different than the Zapotec in Chichicapa or Las Milpas or San Luis del Rio. It changes, and so you have to have it's nice to have one of these talking dictionaries per pueblo if it's possible, and we raised money to do this with the sale of Boca del Cerro Mezcal, which is the 20th anniversary Espadín expression made by Faustino in Chichicapa. So we're always accepting donations to help with this project, and there's a link to the donation site through the International Community Foundation in San Diego included here. And then we'll also be working with the Fundación Comunitaria Oaxaca, which is the Oaxaca Community Foundation here in Oaxaca. So the funds, the tax deductible funds, arrive here in Oaxaca through those means, and then we will have our first talking dictionary program next year. So that's really exciting. And next week, actually, we're going to program a talk with Dr. Riestenberg, my friend Kate, and the founders of the Talking Dictionary program, and two of the community leaders in two communities in Oaxaca that have already implemented this program in their communities. So it'll be a nice learning experience for us to hear how things have gone and what they learned in the first couple of iterations of the Talking Dictionary in Zapotec villages in Oaxaca. And then just quickly, we are also going to help sponsor a rural medical brigade through a really interesting NGO called Growers First that works with lots of coffee growers and plantation growers, always on the agricultural side in Oaxaca and Honduras. And we took out their founder last year, and he really liked the Del Maguey story, and he's going to bring down a rural medical brigade for some of their coffee plantation, coffee producing communities in southern Oaxaca, and they're also willing to bring them up to one of a Del Maguey producing village in at some point this year. So we're going to be looking for donations to fund that, and we'll have some more information about that project before this month is out. So I guess that's it. Misty and I run this sustainability blog together, the Single Village Bulletin. Whenever you want to get updates or read a little bit more about what I talked about today, you can just log into delmaguey.com, and under news there's the Single Village Bulletin, and there's probably around 20 articles that talk on a range of different subjects that actually everybody has contributed to, especially Steve and Ron. So I think that's it. I like ending with this picture of Paciano's sister going to his birthday party. Uh, ain't no thing, just a carton of beer on my head, walking up a hill. Pretty normal and wild.
we do
So,
we do have questions,
um,
so you're not done yet.
okay.
Do you have more photos?
Just clay pot, broken clay pots. That's one reason why ancestral mezcal production is ancestral. The clay pots break constantly. It could cost them more over time to have an ancestral mezcal production facility than an artisanal one, because the copper pots, while they're expensive up front, they last for years depending on the amount of production. But these clay pots, they go through 100 a year. It's really impressive. But the flavor is also is extremely unique. And there's a horse grazing in San Luis del Rio in the morning. Pretty picture. And tepestate flower.
All right. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So Joe had a few questions. One is on the point of economic sustainability. In what ways have the economic well-being of the individual villages improved with international mezcal sales beyond the individual mezcaleros?
Beyond the individual mezcaleros, well, I guess, they're job creators as well. So the mezcaleros, if they have increased work, then they can give work to others, and that's also in the fields, as well as in the palenque. It leads to, if people have heard that a particular village is a mezcal producing village, and they go there specifically for that, and they're international tourists or something like this, then they may be led to a palenque that has never exported mezcal before, and that has never exported. Maybe they're not even certified or something like that, but a local person could lead them to a production facility, and then they meet them, and then they try the mezcal and purchase it from them, and it's just another aspect of a purchase there. So there's these tours. So the tours have helped a lot. I think if there's local restaurants in the village or something like that, then they're receiving business because there's mezcal tourism, and also because of this, the reverse immigration, the sons and daughters coming back, because there's now more economic opportunity in the village. So like a lot of families, as soon as they have made a certain amount of money or something, I mean, I don't know the right way to frame this, but they form they just get a local store, and so they can have a local store out of their homes, and that local store can provide the income for other members of their family. And yeah, I mean, there's probably lots of other examples, but it's almost always based on that. But then, like, some of the work that Heifer was doing, and what we do when Misty brings groups from the U.S. is there's local artisans, and they're able to try and sell their handicrafts to visitors. These visitors wouldn't be in those villages without the mezcal, but then it provides an opportunity for some people to try and sell the other artisanal crafts to them. And then I guess in the case of Santa Ana del Rio, they also had with this hen program, the families, the different families in the village, were not only generating enough eggs to feed their families, but they were generating enough eggs to sell to local restaurants here in Oaxaca. So that created another source of income. So I think, it's good to focus on the economic benefits that come from mezcal, and then these sort of secondary and tertiary potential income streams can be opened up a little bit, but you still have to find a market for it. But with the tours bring income to the pueblos because there's people from other countries with more money and a lot of interest in what's going on locally, and they tend to buy stuff.
All right. Thank you, Gabe. Still staying with Joe, he's asking about replanting. And he asked, is Del Maguey looking at planting numbers adjusted for loss rate relative to harvesting rates? And do we find that wild harvesting magueys is sustainable?
I might have to read the question myself. But yeah, well, basically, any program that you have is. Should I just exit out of the slideshow? Oh, okay. I'll read back. Okay. There you are. Is wild agave harvesting sustainable? I think it's on a community by community basis. These, there's the land grants and land ownership laws in Mexico are unique to Mexico, and these local communities have a lot of autonomy over how their natural resources are managed. At the end of the day, they don't have full autonomy, and there's times when, like when we've looked into the reforestation and deforestation, that the federal government can supersede. They find ways to allow multinational companies into these territories, like for mining or for logging and things like that, and then that puts these local communities in a really awkward position. But so far in the mezcal communities that we work in, the local communities are still managing their wild agave resource well. There's other communities. There's a couple of things. There's people who, if they're near highways or something like that, their wild agave populations can be poached. So the poaching is an issue. When there's high prices for agave in Jalisco, these coyotes will come down who are middlemen for Jalisco. It's either for syrup or it's for tequila, and I think in a lot of cases it's for tequila, and they in many cases will buy any kind of agave. So that provides an economic incentive for people to go out and essentially be poaching the agave. For mezcal, overall, over time, I think there has to be this balance. There has to be a balance between people who want to cultivate what was previously a wild agave and see what that flavor profile looks like, tastes like in the marketplace. And if they have land cleared and they plant those previously wild agave populations and they're now cultivated, then that's one way. The other way is what we're trying to do, which is, you plant in a nursery and you take those plants from the nursery and you put those in the wild, and there's going to be a loss rate. Maybe it'll be similar to nature's survival rate, right? But we have to try, and so it's I think just that combination will be is what we can do for now until we hear otherwise. At the same time, with bars and restaurants closed worldwide, that also has a big impact on demand, and that helps agave flower.
All right. Callie Gold in San Francisco said, without dragging other producers, although if you'd like to, that's fine by me. Callie, you know we don't do that. What kind of practices are to be avoided or are bad for sustainability? As someone who purchases product for a bar, I want to know which questions to ask of producers or the reps selling a product to make sure that we're using our purchasing power wisely.
I mean, that's a great question, obviously. I think because it's the most obvious, I think what your waste management program looks like, waste remediation. I mean, just demonstrate you're doing something, right? Nobody has a solution. Nobody in the world, really, in any aspect of distillation, I think, has a 100% solution to vinasas, which it wasn't relieving to me, but it was, you know, as I tried to tackle this, and you know, people hold mezcal up as being a darling of sustainability, realizing that really nobody has ever tackled this problem 100%. And if somebody has, you know, how could we apply it here? But knowing that people are actively trying to do something with their waste, and that they're conscious about it, is one. The other is what they're doing in some respects with agave cultivation and sort of managing plagues, right? So, you know, there's a couple of things. Lots of people will use chemicals in the first couple of years of an agave's life, and if you don't use it after that, it's still considered an organic product. There's people who use these organic traps for the picudo, which is the larvae that burrows into the espadín from either from the top down or up from the bottom. If they're using those traps and they're aware of what those traps are, even if it's not in all of their agave fields, then that shows that they're conscious of agrochemical use in mezcal production, right? I mean, I think it's something that probably from tequila all the way through mezcal, it's something that is improving, as long as people are finding ways to reduce use or find alternative methods, or at least be conscious of what's going on if they do use them. To be able to have that conversation, I think is beneficial long term for the environment. And then they're agave planting, they're replanting programs. What are they doing? Demonstrate that something's happening, and then how successful is that iteration? How successful is that project? What's the future look like to do more of that? So those are the environmental things that really stand out. And then, you know, the other side is, I think a lot of people talk, and they talk about what they're doing, and then it's hard to prove it. I tried really hard not to talk about things until I could prove it. And so it's just a balance, right? Figuring out if there's substance, if there's proof in the pudding, or just putting in the proof.
That's one thing that has always impressed me, is that even as you would talk about things that were in the works, you would hold the team back from talking about it, recognizing that really we needed to be at a point of success in order to really talk that we'd done something substantial. So I respect that a lot. So okay, we still have 7 unanswered questions. Joe, once again, in regards to the environmental impact study that was done in San Luis del Rio, is that required by law in Mexico? He's curious about the regulatory environment in Oaxaca.
Yes, it's required by law in Mexico in some situations, but with mezcal production, it's not required by law. But I wanted to do it. We wanted to do it to have an idea of what the impact was, because sometimes you do these, like, these studies can be wrapped up in some political machinations as well. Like the examples that I was giving about mining and forestry, some companies got environmental impact studies approved by the federal government, and therefore were allowed to enter into some of these local communities in the mountains. So in some ways, if you're doing it for that, it is for regulation purposes, but things aren't necessarily heavily regulated, and especially in mezcal, because mezcal is considered an artisanal industry, and for good reason in a lot of cases. You know, if it was regulated like in like other types of industries, then you couldn't have animals in the workplace. So there goes the horse and the molino and things like that. And so there's always a bit of a balance that you're trying to catch. You want to be conscious of what you're doing, and then fix it, and then that's always the balance between companies and regulators, right? I mean, regulation is good. How much regulation is good? Well, probably more than none, and then too much regulation would be too much. So in this case, we're self-regulating in Oaxaca right now, and then at some future date, perhaps the government would pay more attention, in the local environmental agencies that answer to the federal agencies would actually have to do their jobs.
Okay, Hannah had two questions in regards to the pandemic. If the nariz approach has to change long term due to the pandemic, do you think the producers in the company will adapt easily enough? And then the second part is there anything specific planned to support the producers during this time?
Okay, well, I don't think that we're going to lose nariz on nariz, but the pueblos have shut down for for now. When they and this is a nice example of local governance, right? Has every small village shut down at the same time? No, but they are shutting down, and so it's you see this the local dialogue between community members and leaders, and how they're closing and who they allow in, and if they're conscious of what that means economically to everybody, because they can't be going to Oaxaca, they can't be doing their normal stuff. It's a really, in a lot of ways, it's a really beautiful system. It's not perfect, but it seems to work. But I don't have any doubt that we'll be able to get back to working face to face with them, and I don't think that there will be too much risk. But people have conducted. We can have phone calls all the time now. The relationships have developed to the point where you can definitely have a phone call. But if it's an important business conversation or an important conversation, you have to do it in person. So we'll see, and based on what's happening in the current affairs of the pandemic, and we'll just adjust from there. With regard to what specific projects we're doing right now, I mean, it's interesting because in the pueblos, it's really hard to stop life. People live. The agricultural lifestyle is you wake up with the sun and you fall asleep with the sun, and so in a lot of cases, people kept working. What stopped was all the international interactions with those pueblos, right? So I think in our case, we've first stressed that production is not going down. Whatever they produce, just as always, we're going to buy. And so, like from the very beginning of the presentation, that economic security is such an important part of who we are, and it's sort of entwined in the DNA of the relationship with the producers. So there's economic security. If for some reason they aren't producing or need something, and this is something I didn't really mention, but like Ron has always offered, whenever there's a medical emergency, Ron has paid for it, and Maguey has paid for it, and it's has happened a lot with every family, and it's usually a no questions asked, and we're not a healthcare provider, but if there's no other option, that's one of the nice things about our relationship, is that Ron and the partner's generosity is really been evident over time. So there's that. We're going to bring in the rural medical brigades to, at least, we're not going to bring them in. Growers First is going to bring them, thankfully, and we're going to facilitate that. And then this is something I guess I didn't really mention too much either, and something that's come up in some of these internet conversations, that online conversations that I've heard from other producers. It's like, we're never necessarily pushing projects on to communities or something like that. In 95% of the cases, it's, hey, we need materials for the school. We need a computer. We need paint. We'd like to have an auditorium with a projector, things like that. And when they ask, then we see what's possible, and then we really 99% of the time deliver on that. So I think it'll be a similar situation. Right now, everybody's okay still. Nobody's in crisis with our families. There's definitely a crisis going on in pueblos and in Oaxaca and in Mexico, but we just have to keep our ears open and see what comes up. And then when that comes up, then we'll be able to get together and see what's possible.
Yeah. And I think this is when, like, the importance of communication and the things like internet that's really important in a time like this, as far as maintaining that nariz on nariz. It's like, for me to be able to have a conversation via Facebook Messenger live, like face to face with Esperidion and his family in Santo Domingo, to check in on them, that wouldn't have happened even, a year ago. And so that's a really important aspect of that, I think, and why it's so important to maintain that. Yes.
Yeah, and they're comfortable with the Facebook live call with you. I mean, that's and that does open things up, and even if we are separated, we're not separated completely, because that medium exists. Mm-hmm. So that's really cool that you're communicating with them.
Hannah also asked if we have exclusive contracts with our producers, and if so, why?
Well, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I don't think you necessarily have exclusivity, but you do. So, with the way that Comercam is the industry regulator, and there's contracts that are signed between the producers. We're considered a producer, and the producers are considered a producer. And so for the use of their land and stuff, we're partners. And because of that, and those are agreements that are signed all the time between third parties and producers underneath the Comercam, like some of the regulations there. And so, yeah, they're just agreements. They're agreements that that both sides will hold up their end of a relationship. I think that that's not a horrible thing to ask about. And then exclusivity doesn't mean that you know, they can't sell to people in the village that want mezcal. But if there's another brand that comes around trying to buy the same mezcal, you know, we would look at that as you know, as an offensive gesture.
Okay.
And based on our years of relationship and the time that we've been working with these producers. So that would be my answer to that.
And one last question from Amar. What are the sources of water that are used for mezcal production?
They're local sources of water. So it depends sort of where the producing facility is built. In the case of Santo Domingo Albradas, they have Manantial spring water coming right out of the mountain, and it's, you know, you can drink it, and it's wonderful. In Chichicapa and Minas, they have well water, and it's soft water, and it's really good, but very minerally. In San Luis del Rio, it's also a well, but it's a well that's replenished with the filtration from the river water, but it's filtered from the river water into the well. And yeah, I think those are the main sources: spring and well water.
All right.
And then if it's a really pristine river, then you can just get straight river water.
Okay. Well, that's it. You answered all the questions.
Okay. We did it.
Well, thanks to everyone who joined us today. Like I said, if you want to refer back to anything, this will be on the YouTube channel, or if you want to share it with anybody. So thanks, Gabe. You were great.
Thank you, Misty. Thank you again for organizing it. The best madrina around.
Thanks, Gabe. Hold on, wait 1 second. Okay, yeah, awesome. Bye, everybody.
Bye.